They did it. They freaking did it, everyone. Apple finally built the computer that I've been wanting for almost a decade. Yesterday, Apple announced the new Mac Pro at WWDC, along with a bevy of new software updates for all of their platforms. For example, iPad got its own fork of iOS, dubbed iPadOS. All Apple devices now support a system-wide dark mode. macOS can now run iOS apps, which is pretty cool, but literally, I mean, who gives a crap about any of that when there's a new Mac Pro? Well, I mean, probably everyone other than me, but this isn't about you. This is about me and my Mac Pro. I've waited long enough for this. A few months ago, I made a plea to Apple that they not continue down the road of propriety that started with the 2013 trash can Mac Pro, and instead opt for an open PC design with support for industry standards. I mean, clearly Apple saw my video and they changed their entire product design in less than a month because it's exactly what I asked for. It definitely wasn't the case that rumors of this janky modular Mac Pro were false. No, this was all me. So let's take a close look at the internals of the hardware that I inspired Apple to create. For all intents and purposes, this is really just a PC, which harkens back to the famous cheese grater design introduced by the Power Mac G5, which was released in 2003. Now, this machine is also a cheese grater, a more aggressive one, and if the AR tool that Apple has released is to be believed, the size of the new Mac Pro is shockingly close to the original cheese grater, which is pretty close to a full-size tower PC case. This is no tiny little trash can, it's a big computer. The design also has Mark Newson written all over it, the famous industrial designer that joined Apple in 2014 to help develop the Apple Watch. Now, these big holes might be a little bit jarring, but they're really good for something that has been neglected in basically every Apple computer since, I don't know, 2013? Airflow. Apple told Overcast developer Marco Arment that cooling was one of the primary motives behind the design. And for a pro design with a pro price tag intended for pros, I say bring on the airflow, man, even if it means that the design is a little bit less attractive. In fact, Apple did a lot of stuff to just generally improve ergonomics. There are optional wheels, so you can roll it around. The handlebars don't look as good, but they're significantly more comfortable than the first-gen cheese grater, which would cut into your hands. They were the worst. And all of the side panels are removable, which allows you to reveal the frame in which the components reside. I've looked at the renders, spec sheets, and done research for hours, and I want to share some of the stuff that I've discovered. There are basically two sides to this machine. The main compartment is cooled by three large, presumably 120mm intake fans, and they exhaust through the holes in the back of the case. There is no exhaust fan on this side, which is kind of interesting. The GPUs Apple will include are all fanless, and they utilize the case's airflow design, which in theory will make things very quiet, but we'll have to see if temperatures are a problem when I get my model in for testing later this year. We'll see if the front fans are capable of expelling all of that heat through the back of the chassis. The backside of the motherboard is relatively barren, with memory modules, 2 slots for what I imagine to be a proprietary pinout for Apple's NVMe SSDs, a fairly substantial heatsink for what is presumably the Intel C621 chipset, which by itself carries a 15-watt TDP, and a pretty massive blower fan to suck air in through the front of the case and exhaust air out of the back. The CPU is a meaty boy, and whilst not officially disclosed by Apple, the machine is most certainly using the Cascade Lake Xeon W processors that were announced by Intel yesterday. All of these chips support the AVX512 instruction set with 2 FMA units, although so does the iMac Pro and lesser Xeons. And while all of the CPUs support hexachannel memory, that's why the machine has an insane 12 slots for RAM, the 8-core, 12-core, and 16-core models can only support up to 1 terabyte of RAM. Yeah, 1 terabyte. The 24 and 28 core models are capable of supporting up to 2 terabytes of memory. Although with 12 DIMMs, realistically, that's only 1.5 terabytes of memory that can be purchased today. Yes, only 1.5 terabytes. A single RAM DIMM has, in that configuration, 128 gigs of memory per stick. That's insane. The way Apple words their specs page, all machines should be sold with 29 to 33 MHz ECC memory. However, the base model 8-core will only be capable of running that memory at 2666 MHz. Now, this is an Intel limitation and not just Apple being a douche to get you to upgrade. Apple told Marco Arment that the CPU cooler is capable of dissipating heat of up to a 300-watt TDP chip, which means that there is significant cooling overhead for potentially even more powerful chip upgrades down the line, so long as the chipset remains supported by Intel. They also stated that it means that the CPUs can maintain full turbo boost, if not indefinitely, at least for a very extended period of time. Sweet. C'est la vie, thermal throttling? Maybe. The other hallmark of these pricey Xeon chips is an additional 16 PCIe lanes, which brings the total to 4x16 for 64 total lanes, making this the highest I/O chip that Intel sells. Pretty bananas. Speaking of I/O and expandability, Apple did everything I could have hoped for and more. Oh, almost. There are 8 total PCIe slots, 1 half-length slot for the included I/O card, 3 single-width slots, and 4 double-width slots. 2 of those provide support for Apple's special new MPX connector, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, the I/O on this machine, the end-user I/O, is hilariously bad. There are 2 Thunderbolt ports on the top of the case near the power button, and then the removable I/O card that comes with the computer includes 2 USB-A 3.1 Gen 2, 2 Thunderbolt 3, and a headphone jack. And that's it. Well, and then strangely enough, there are 2 10 gigabit Ethernet ports built into the removable 1400 watt power supply at the bottom of the machine. So yeah, 4 Thunderbolt and 2 USB. There's also 2 SATA ports and a diagnostic port, and then an extra USB-A port inside for those weird PCIe ASIC cards that need it. But that's pretty awful standard I/O. But Apple knows that real pros have variant I/O needs. And run-of-the-mill PCIe slots means that you can add whatever you want. Need more USB-A? Great, add a cheap PCIe card. Need more Thunderbolt? Add a PCIe card. Need more networking options? PCIe card. Need more SATA ports? PCIe, you get what I'm putting down. Now let's talk GPUs, because these are kind of weird. Apple developed these cards with basically 2 PCIe connectors on them. The first one is a standard 16-lane PCIe 3 slot that can supply up to 75 watts of power. However, Apple has added a separate PCIe-style connector that can supply up to an additional 475 watts of power, which they call MPX. Now, PC guys might be scratching their head asking why Apple did this, because PCIe 4, which is upcoming, can supply 275 watts of power over the slot. Well, there's 2 reasons. For one, 275 watt power still isn't enough for their higher-end graphics cards, and PCIe 4 isn't on the immediate roadmap for Intel's Xeon lineup, so Apple's hands were tied. The stock configuration includes a rather dated Radeon Pro 580X GPU with 8 gigs of VRAM, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, and DisplayPort over the built-in Thunderbolt ports. This is a half-height MPX module, which uses Apple's weird power connector, but allows the 8X slot above it to be available for use. But that's kind of a lame card. Where things get interesting are with Apple's new AMD Radeon Vega 2 cards. No, wait a minute, Vega 2? What the heck does that entail? Well, no surprise, Apple doesn't provide many specs on their site, but AMD is happy to oblige. It's basically a Radeon 7, but with 4 more compute units and way more HBM2 memory. Now, if the Vega 2 isn't enough, you can get a Vega 2 Duo, which basically slaps 2 of these GPUs onto the same PCB, bringing 28.2 teraflops of compute with 64 gigs of HBA2 memory. And the Mac Pro can support 2 of these Duo cards, which means that you can have 4 GPUs on 2 cards, bringing 56.4 teraflops of compute, 128 gigabytes of HBM2 VRAM, and a very, very empty bank account. Apple also kindly supplies up to 300 watts over 2 8-pin connectors per MPX slot, which means that you can basically use any off-the-shelf GPU you want, so long as it has driver support for macOS. This is super, super cool, because if you don't want to go with Apple's very cool but likely very expensive GPU options, you don't have to. You can bring your own. Okay, let's finally bring this hype train back into reality. I don't want to hear the whole, oh, I could build a faster PC for $2,000. Because if you look at the raw component cost, this is an insanely expensive computer to build and thus to sell. And there are a bevy of pro features like AVX 512 support, hexachannel ECC 2TB extended memory support, 64 PCIe lanes, etc. Now, if you consider these features dumb or unnecessary, this isn't the computer for you. You're not in this market. This is a no-compromise machine that spares no expense. With that said, the $5,999, $6,000 base price model is honestly pretty outlandish. The W3225 CPU costs $1,200 by itself, but the rest of the components, like the very old and very cheap 580X GPU, the 32 gigs of ECC memory, and the downright offensive 250 gig SSD, are not pricey. Now, on the SSD, a lot of people bring up the fact that this machine is likely going to be utilized over the network, and that's true. They may not need that much internal storage. But the iMac Pro comes with a 1TB SSD and a rather nice 5K screen for $1,000 less. $2,000 less if you can get it on sale. Again, this is not a consumer machine, and it is totally normal for PC OEMs to charge out the nose for enterprise. Believe me, I just built a server and it would offend you how outrageously priced some stuff is. But still, I mean, Apple, a 256 gig SSD? Come on. What I'd be interested to see is if you could use a PCIe-based SSD for your boot volume, and then you could save a lot of money by just not paying for an upgraded internal NVMe drive. But yeah, the base model is really underwhelming for $6,000. You could build nearly the exact same machine without a case for $2,700 less. And I mean, look, it's a beautiful case, but I don't think it's worth that much. Now, once you jump to the 12-core option, the price performance per dollar should start to look a lot more reasonable. Still pro-priced, but not outrageously pro-priced. But we don't yet know what Apple will charge for that. I guess the plus side is that you can buy the model you can afford and then upgrade the parts as you find the budget or need to do so. Oh yeah, and then we get to the Pro Display 10DR.
XDR.
All right, the XDR. It is a 32-inch 6K HDR-capable IPS LCD with allegedly insane viewing angles and a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, with support for the DCI-P3 wide color gamut at a 10-bit depth. The display has 576 dimming zones, so it's not quite as good as OLED, but it should drastically reduce the backlight bleed and bloom that you're used to on normal computer monitors. The total peak brightness of 1600 nits and a sustained brightness of 1000 nits means that this thing gets hot and has two fans to quietly but actively cool the panel. It sounds good, right? Well, the thing is, it cost $5,000. Now again, Apple didn't pitch this as a consumer display, rather as competition to the ultra high-end color grading monitors used by editing houses. But colorists are more than a little skeptical by saying that this is not a reference monitor and lacks the features to ever become one. However, Blackmagic has interestingly announced a monitoring solution specifically designed for the Pro Display XDR, which is supposed to bring many of these needed features. If it turns out good, it would make the Pro Display XDR the most value-friendly monitor in the professional color grading world. The question is, will it? I have no idea. I'll leave it to the pros to decide come launch day. So yeah, for most everyone, this is a completely unnecessary machine. It is not designed for the common man. It is not spec'd for the common man. It is not priced for the common man. Doing some napkin math, I would estimate that a fully loaded Mac Pro is going to cost north of $45,000 based on the retail parts that I can find online. It's clear that the i9 iMac is intended for most, the iMac Pro is intended for some, and the Mac Pro is intended for few. I certainly don't need one. My base model iMac Pro is more than powerful enough, but I mean, what kind of fanboy would I be if I didn't buy one of these things? So we're gonna have a lot of fun with it when I get mine come this fall. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay snazzy.